Hello, my name is Alejandro Adam. I'm the president of the Natural Sciences and Engineering Research Council of Canada, and I'm the moderator of this very interesting panel on the pitfalls and promise in data science and artificial intelligence. As you know, during the current pandemic, we have all seen the importance of data, of good data, of reliable data, accessible data, and the incredible role that something like artificial intelligence can play in that setting. Artificial intelligence, of course, has many, many applications in different aspects of society and of life, but in particular, the applications to health, I think, are very exciting and will hopefully lead to a better future for all of us. Now, on this panel, we have some fantastic speakers. They are Joshua Benjo from the University of Montreal, Ryan Wiley, president of Shift Health, Elissa Strom, executive director of Pan-Canadian AI Strategy at CFAR, and Anna Goldberg from the University of Toronto. Now, what we're going to do is ask them to make a few statements, each of in turn, and then we're going to have a discussion and some questions. We do want to encourage the audience to submit questions via Slido, which is available. We look forward to hearing from you. I also want to thank our G7 sponsors on behalf of the Royal Society of Canada and the University of Toronto. So let's get started. This is a very meaty topic, and I want to start by asking our colleague Elissa to talk to us about her views on this topic.
Great. Thank you very much, Alejandro. I think everybody can hear me. I'm going to jump right in. I'm really excited to be part of this conversation today with so many of my colleagues and friends, particularly because I'm an optimist about this topic. I'm a pragmatist, but I'm also an optimist. And I firmly believe that implementing AI within our health systems in a way that's strategic and judicious will really deliver significant benefits for Canadians. I think that AI has the potential to really improve the health of Canadians, allowing them to live healthier and longer lives. That AI within our health systems can really help to contain some of the costs for our provinces and territories, and that we have a huge opportunity in Canada to really leverage AI and innovation around AI within health to be a leader in the commercialization of AI for health solutions, and the opportunity to implement those solutions in Canada and export those solutions to the world really has an opportunity for significant economic benefits. And so I came to this position through work that we did over the last year with a National AI for Health Task Force. At CFAR, we convened a group of about 17 leaders from across the country and across sectors. We were encouraged to do this by the AI and health research and innovation communities who said, you know, there's so much opportunity in Canada, but a real lack of coordination and no strategy for how we can implement AI within our health systems. And so we took on that charge and brought together this set of leaders who really looked at, you know, what's happening already in Canada, where are the opportunities, where are the challenges, and developed a series of recommendations to governments, both federal governments, but also provincial and territorial governments, on how we can build some foundations, establish the necessary talent, infrastructure, resources, expertise to really think about implementing AI in a strategic and broad way across our health systems. The task force was co-chaired by David Naylor and Tim Evans. Tim is actually on a panel later on this afternoon, so you'll have a chance to meet him. And many members of the task force actually are part of today's symposium, including Anna Goldenberg, who's here with us in this panel today. So one of the things that we found as we were doing sort of the foundational research for the AI for Health Task Force is that Canada has many advantages that can really help position us as a world leader in this space. Of course, we have really great expertise in both AI and health, research and innovation. Our publicly funded healthcare systems are a huge advantage because it means that data can be collected at a whole population level. In Canada, we enjoy one of the most diverse populations in the world. That's a huge strategic advantage because it means that AI solutions that are developed here can be more easily implemented in other jurisdictions. In Health Canada, we have a regulator that's really a world leader in thinking in an innovative way around health product regulation. We found that many provinces are actively investing in AI and health data. And this has accelerated significantly since COVID began. So lots of activity in building up resources, infrastructure, and capacity in Alberta, BC, Ontario, Quebec, for example. And over the last few years, we've seen really strategic and significant investments by the federal government in research and innovation on AI for health. This includes, of course, the Pan-Canadian AI strategy, investments through CIHR, through the Strategic Innovation Fund, and through the superclusters. So there's a ton of activity and capacity in Canada in this space, but a real lack of coordination and strategy. And so we developed our recommendations and shared them at a series of town hall consultations where we engaged with hundreds of leaders across sectors across the country and launched our report in July of 2020. It's posted on the CFAR website. If you're looking for it, it's called Building a Learning Health System for Canadians, and I invite you to download it from our site. I'll just recap it very quickly right now. We had three major areas where we called on governments, both the federal government and provincial and territorial governments, to come together and act urgently to develop, basically lay the foundation towards a national AI for health strategy. The first area of action that we're looking for is around data, access to health data, enabling access to health data, making sure that it's done so in a way that protects privacy and security, making sure that we have the necessary hardware and software infrastructure to use that health data are all key steps that need to happen. And when we think about data, of course, we also have to really ensure that we are approaching it in a way that is inclusive and respectful of the public and patient groups. And we need to think really actively and strategically about including stakeholders across the board, but particularly members of the public and patient groups in our conversations about how and when and where we're using health data. The second major area of action that we called for was really around policy. And of course, that's of deep interest today. You know, we're really looking for governments to develop policies that enable procurement and commercialization of AI for health applications. We need incentives for health systems to be able to do that. We need a coordinated approach. We need strategies on that. We need to have some new regulations in thinking about how public sector health data could be used by the private sector. That's a key area of concern by many stakeholders, including the public. We need to make sure that we have policies that are supportive of innovation and commercialization. We have a really vibrant, healthy AI for health startup ecosystem in this country. We need to make sure that they have the resources, the data, the expertise, the talent that they need to grow and thrive. And we need to make sure that we're supporting multi-stakeholder collaboration, that our innovators have access to the clinical problems, to the data sets, to the health system itself in order to be able to develop their solutions. The third area that we focused on was really thinking about a national AI for health ecosystem. We definitely need to think about how can governments work together? How can we align our health data and digital strategies so that they work together to implement AI strategically? We need to develop that national AI for health strategy. And we also need to make sure that we are including stakeholders from across different sectors and that we're supporting partnerships. And so we called for the establishment of a national coordinated AI for health strategy, partnerships to support this work, and deep investment in education and talent. And so overall, we think that if governments will act urgently to develop and implement a national AI for health strategy, we'll see some really significant benefits for Canadians. It gives us an opportunity to leverage and mobilize our AI for health talent. It will enable us to focus on priorities where AI can have a transformative impact, identify those priorities across the country and work together to address them. That's especially important right now as we're in the middle of a pandemic where we've seen lots of interest and lots of goodwill and activity, but still a lack of coordination happening across the country. And at the end of the day, I think that what will happen if we can develop and implement a national AI for health strategy is that we will deliver healthcare innovation for Canadians in the world. And so I'm looking forward to the further discussion with my colleagues on this topic. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lisa. There's certainly a lot to unpack in what you just told us, and I'm hoping the other panel members will comment on that and also in our questions. Now I want to turn to Joshua for his presentation. Joshua?
Hello, thank you. I really liked everything you said, Elisa, and I want to reinforce a few points, maybe push a bit in some direction. So I think many people, including in government, understand, and in industry, understand the huge potential of AI, not just to accelerate medical progress, but to be even bringing deep transformations in the way that we're conceiving how medical treatments are invented and improved. But as you said, there are places where we need to change our ways, that we need to change our policies. Let me start with one aspect that I've been personally kind of dealing with in my work on AI-based contact tracing, where I learned a lot in this project about the tension that exists between privacy and being able to bring, improved health. And of course, this is, just one example. And I know from a lot of other experiences that there's a general issue here of finding the right trade-off. And it's not a one-dimensional thing, because if you start working at the technical level or in terms of policies, you can find better compromises. In general, I would say one of the issues right now, both culturally in terms of like the media and the population perception and the government perception, there is a lot of weight that is given to privacy, which is understandable, and we need to protect that. But people don't understand that tension. That if we insist too much on having completely foolproof privacy of like health data, we are going to lose huge opportunities in saving lives and getting better, higher quality lives for people. So there's an educational aspect to this that needs to be reinforced by publications, by discussions like we're having today, and it's going to take time. And your report, of course, goes in that direction. Okay, so that's one thing. But one element of it that now I would like to expand on is the reason there's this tension is because AI needs data, right? It needs data to be successful. And so we have to think about, what are the barriers to allowing researchers or innovators in industry to get the right data in order to come up with the right discoveries that we need. And now for my next point, I would like to talk about the issues in a particular industry as part of the medical challenges we are having, which is the pharmaceutical industry or the drug discovery industry. And there are issues there, and then where the current market forces are somehow failing to deliver what we need. And again, through a recent experience in my group, I've been faced with issues as we've been working on antivirals for COVID-19. Talking to a lot of people in this area and understanding that the current forces of competition and profitability really mean that there's not a lot of incentives for companies to work on infectious diseases, on drugs for infectious diseases. And pandemics are, and COVID-19 being one example. Another really large example is antibiotics-resistant pathogens. This is something that I discovered only in the last few months, that we are all, the whole planet is moving towards a huge danger with potentially 10 million deaths per year in 20 years if we don't find the right collective decisions. And markets are not going to give us these answers unless governments find the right incentive systems or regulation that are going to stimulate the research in the right responses And it's that, and it's also the way that these antibiotics are being used right now, which, from the point of view of an individual patient or doctor, it's easy to use an antibiotic, but really collectively, because this enables more mutations of the pathogen, it's hurtful. And so we need to somehow regulate how these are used. So there are lots of things like this where governments will need to really think through both policy and incentives in order to deal with those challenges and take advantage of the potential of AI in those areas. So now let me go specifically about the potential of AI in areas of drug discovery. So I mentioned that there is a market failure, but I didn't really explain it very much. So there's one aspect, which is that it might not be profitable to work on some of these diseases or potential diseases that are coming to us. But there's another aspect which is very dear to my heart as an academic, as a researcher in universities. And that is the notion of knowledge as a public good, and data, in this case, as a public good. So currently, there are data sets that are being harvested in industry, but are staying behind closed doors. So previously, when I began talking about the problem of privacy and health data, I was thinking more about data, very important data sets being kept behind closed doors in the public sector. But we also have a similar problem in the private sector, right? So because of the pressure to compete against other companies, unless we change rules of the game, the sort of governance policies and regulations that might be relevant in a field like drug discovery, companies are going to continue to try to keep as much as possible their data sets and the details of the discoveries they're making in the process of looking for drugs completely hidden. And you have to understand that the way that science progresses efficiently is through sharing of information. That's why we, in academia, we have this very strong incentive to publish our work and to provide the details, and now more and more to do open science where the data, the code, and so on is open. That makes it easier for other researchers to build on what we're doing, and that accelerates the progress of science. So what I'm saying is that if we want innovation, not just in the public sector, but also in the private sector, we may have to rethink the rules of the game in terms of sharing of information, data, and so on. So that was the last point I wanted to bring. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Joshua. Very interesting topics. The whole discussion about privacy of data, I know is crucial, and I know the public people kind of care a lot about that aspect of data. I want to turn now to Anna. Tell us a few things from her point of view. Anna?
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for inviting me. I am one of those people actively working on implementing AI in healthcare, and switching gears a little bit to tell you a bit of my perspective on where we are on that. So I think, as you have heard already, and at this point in history, I think many understand that artificial intelligence is not really a luxury anymore, but an acute necessity. We are talking about an overabundance of data I'm assuming we'll have access to. And if the key to understanding the human condition is in that data, then AI is not just a spotlight, it's actually an industrial strength projector to help find that key to propel healthcare into the future. I think what is critical right now from the perspective of the AI developers is to sort of set realistic expectations for where we are right now and what kind of policy makes sense to implement at the moment. So I think there's a major issue that people talk about AI as if it were omnipotent and almost magical, and hence there's a lot of hype, and that hype sets very unrealistic expectations of AI's current capabilities, and thus we are rushing to over-police it I think AI right now is more akin to the Silicon Valley in the 80s, when it was very exciting. There was a lot of new development, but it was the early days. We can't afford such risks as computers catching on fire as it happened back then in the medical field. And yet it is a relatively new technology in healthcare, and it will have to learn to walk. We have to enable it to walk before it can run. I think this means that the first methods that I implemented in healthcare will be imperfect. And
les premières technologies seront imparfaites au départ. Et je sais, cependant, que l'évolution va être très rapide au fur et à mesure que nous permettrons leur déploiement. Quelles sont les conditions, quels sont les garde-fous pour les déploiements de l'intelligence artificielle dans le service de la santé maintenant? Je crois qu'il faut commencer par poser les bonnes questions pour assurer qu'il est possible de les mettre en œuvre. Un grand hôpital aux États-Unis a développé un modèle pour projeter les cas d'infection systémique ou septicémie. Mais les données ont un peu changé en fonction des modèles. Si le modèle prédit, mais que rien n'a été, aucun médicament n'a été prédit pour éviter une septicémie, on considère le modèle comme un échec, mais ce n'est pas vraiment une réflexion de la performance du modèle. La mise en œuvre des instruments de l'intelligence artificielle exige une adaptation avec les processus hospitaliers. Cela veut dire qu'il faut qu'il y ait beaucoup de gens qui soient impliqués. La technologie de l'information de l'hôpital, l'administration, les chercheurs, le personnel hospitalier. Est-ce qu'il faut une réglementation? Pas forcément. Enfin, je ne pense pas. Mais il faut certainement une évaluation adéquate pour ce que nous appelons souvent un essai fantôme, un essai parallèle. C'est-à-dire que cela n'affecte pas le processus à proprement parler. Donc, l'essai doit être fait dans le contexte clinique. Et bien souvent, à l'heure actuelle à Toronto, au Canada et ailleurs, il y a un grand nombre de ces modèles qui sont en place. Maintenant, pour l'établissement d'attentes réalistes, quand on teste les outils, il faut avant tout avoir une référence solide pour déterminer le degré de performance des cliniciens et pour vérifier le degré d'exactitude clinique en fonction de l'expérience. Donc souvent, les performances des cliniciens plus jeunes ou moins expérimentés sont inférieures à leurs aînés. Peut-être que l'on voit une différence dans l'utilisation de l'outil quand il est employé par un clinicien junior par rapport à un clinicien plus senior. Il faut analyser les performances et voir si la performance, la collaboration entre le clinicien et l'instrument peuvent être améliorées pour améliorer leur performance à tous les deux. Pour ce qui est de l'évaluation, il est essentiel d'indiquer dans quelles conditions le fonctionnement est bon et ne pas s'attendre à ce que l'outil fonctionne dans n'importe quel cas. Il est important de fonctionner selon certains paramètres. Une question très importante qui est évoquée pratiquement autant que la confidentialité des données, c'est le caractère interprétable des modèles boîte noire. Par exemple, comment est-ce que je vais les utiliser, ces modèles, si je ne les comprends pas? Je travaille avec beaucoup de cliniciens qui disent souvent on ne comprend pas forcément comment tout fonctionne, comment l'IRM fonctionne, comment les aptitudes numériques fonctionnent. Ce que nous savons, c'est comment les utiliser et qu'en attendre. Les recherches récentes ont révélé qu'il n'était peut-être pas souhaitable d'avoir des modèles interprétables. Quand on a des modèles interprétables, les êtres humains ont tendance à leur faire une confiance excessive. Ils laissent le modèle faire des erreurs et même si eux-mêmes n'auraient pas fait l'erreur s'ils avaient fait plus attention. En d'autres termes, nous devons concentrer nos efforts à l'heure actuelle, pas forcément sur l'aptitude des cliniciens à connaître le détail du fonctionnement du modèle d'intelligence artificielle, mais comprendre comment travailler avec ce modèle, à quoi s'attendre, de la même manière que les autres outils et équipements très complexes dont ils se servent déjà dans les hôpitaux. Ce n'est pas une question de réglementation, je ne pense pas, mais peut-être de lignes directrices, de recommandations quant au processus d'évaluation, afin qu'en fin de test, le clinicien se sente à l'aise quant à l'emploi de l'instrument, de l'outil en question. J'aimerais revenir en conclusion sur un élément qui est qu'il faut une équipe interdisciplinaire pour avoir un outil qui puisse être utilisé et mis en place. Il faut mobiliser des cliniciens qui sont prêts à consacrer une grande partie de leur temps à créer un outil d'intelligence artificielle qui sera utile dans le contexte hospitalier. Il faut l'aide de la sécurité, de la technologie de l'information, de l'environnement, etc. Simplement laisser les choses fonctionner telles quelles, ça ne va pas aider. Nous n'arrêtons pas d'améliorer la qualité de la technologie, donc il faut que l'on élabore des politiques qui motivent plus avant ces efforts de développement. Merci. Je crois que votre micro n'est pas branché, Alejandro. Voilà, merci. Merci, Anna, de cette observation. Je vous en suis très reconnaissant, en particulier cette notion de la boîte noire, qui me semble un élément sur lequel il faudrait revenir plus avant. Je vais maintenant donner la parole à Ryan pour avoir sa perspective. Merci, Alejandro. Merci à mes collègues qui ont vraiment jeter les bases, les fondements et brosser un tableau qui nous indique ce qu'il va falloir pour avoir un système d'intelligence artificielle qui fonctionne vraiment bien dans notre contexte de système sanitaire. Alors, qu'est-ce que nous essayons de créer pour finir? J'ai quelques diapositives que je vais vous présenter, mais ce ne sont que des illustrations visuelles de ce que j'essaie d'expliquer. Lorsque je pense aux promesses et aux obstacles de la science des données et de l'intelligence artificielle et aux instruments, aux outils numériques dans le contexte du secteur santé, j'imagine l'avenir dans lequel nous allons pouvoir les utiliser et ce que cet avenir voudra dire pour la pérennité de notre système et pour ceux qui s'en servent au quotidien. Selon moi, cet avenir est de plus en plus individualisé. Nous savons que l'aptitude à recueillir, échanger et utiliser différentes données de santé est la pierre de touche du secteur de santé. Par contre, lorsque l'on parle de traitement ou de détermination d'un traitement, tout est fondé sur les données personnelles, les antécédents de données précis en incluant toutes les possibilités d'inclusion de tous les traitements possibles qui seraient appropriés. La meilleure manière peut-être d'envisager cet avenir, c'est en le comparant avec le statu quo. Le Canada a beaucoup de chance. Il a un service de santé, un système de santé, un secteur santé formidable en termes de talent, d'équipement et autres. Mais à bien des égards, nous essayons d'intégrer une vision du 21e siècle dans les contraintes du 20e siècle. Notre modèle présente vraiment des solutions à l'emporte-pièce, des solutions uniques. Il faut, nous travaillons sur la base des données tirées des statistiques qui permettent de calculer tout en fonction des moyennes, taux de mortalité moyen, taux de maladie moyen, etc. Les interactions avec le système de santé sont généralement lorsqu'on identifie un problème ou qu'on a on identifie des besoins ou des difficultés. Notre orientation est réactivement seulement concentrée sur les maladies. Avant tout, on se concentre sur l'élimination des maladies et la gestion des maladies et non pas une optimisation sur l'ensemble du continuum. Notre système de récompense et d'incitation est déterminé par les activités et donc par les coûts. Donc, nous payons ce que nous pouvons mesurer de manière immédiate. Nombre de lits d'hôpitaux occupés, non pas la valeur qu'un excellent secteur santé peut créer pour la population tout entière. Imaginons maintenant un monde fondé sur l'intelligence artificielle où nous pouvons financer, utiliser, analyser les données, qu'elles viennent de la génomique, de la géographie, de l'économie, etc., sur toute la durée de vie de la population. nous aurions un tableau très clair de dont on a besoin et de ce qui est idéal dans chaque contexte. Nous aurions la possibilité de générer des données, des perspectives de manière synchrone et continue en combinant les données du monde réel avec les analyses de pointe pour obtenir des projections que les cliniciens peuvent utiliser pour leurs projections. Nous pourrons étendre notre définition du secteur santé pour y inclure davantage la dimension prévention et nous pourrons mieux interpréter les données pour ce qui peut être créé pour le système de santé et sa pérennisation, l'impact sur les familles, sur les soignants informels et sur toute la productivité économique et le taux de mortalité. Il ne s'agit pas d'un fantasme ou d'un rêve. À bien des égards, nous commençons déjà à observer l'impact transformatif des données de santé analysées et utilisées de manière systématique sur tout le réseau canadien. Regardez dans le cas de l'hôpital du Nord-Est, l'hôpital général du Nord-Est, qui est le premier à mettre en place ce genre d'équipement pour des soins électroniques. Et dans cet hôpital, on utilise des informations et des instruments pour améliorer la sécurité, la condition des patients et économiser sur les coûts. Les résultats sont encourageants. Sur une période de 10 ans, l'hôpital a pu éviter 7700
expectations. We cannot underestimate the complexity of personalized healthcare and the AI solutions that are needed to enable it. The implications are multifaceted, they're daunting, and addressing these implications will require unprecedented collaboration and partnership across sectors and stakeholders. It will, as has been mentioned by my colleagues, access to high quality data, and it will require our ability to connect health information systems, sectors, and jurisdictions to share data safely and responsibly. I want to turn to
la pandémie accélère notre mouvement vers cet avenir. Il y a quelques éléments que j'aimerais mentionner qui changent notre écosystème de données. Le premier, c'est que la COVID-19 nous a contraints de comprendre qu'il nous fallait de meilleurs instruments numériques et nous avions besoin d'utiliser les outils numériques disponibles de meilleure manière. Je parle de Blue Dot en particulier, un grand nombre d'entre vous le connaissent, c'est une entreprise canadienne qui se spécialise dans la surveillance des maladies infectieuses par l'application de l'intelligence artificielle. En analysant les données sur les billets de compagnies aériennes et bien d'autres, Blue Dot a pu détecter les premières indications de flambée de COVID-19 et a été l'un des premiers à annoncer ces nouvelles en décembre 2019, avant même que les CDC des États-Unis ne l'aient fait, si seulement on les avait écoutés. Deuxièmement, et je reviens sur ce qu'a dit Alejandro tout à l'heure, la collaboration et le partenariat sans précédent entre les secteurs, entre concurrents et avec le public qui déchaînent le potentiel de ces données sanitaires. Les entreprises hésitent à partager ces informations, il faut leur donner les incitations pour le faire. C'est vrai, mais les perspectives changent. Transcelerate en est un exemple. C'est une collaboration à but non lucratif entre plusieurs entreprises pharmaceutiques qui échangent les données cliniques, y compris les données de contrôle sur les cas de COVID-19 recensés et projetés. un grand nombre de juridictions ont repéré des carences et ont pu y remédier en transformant leurs relations avec les données sanitaires. Par exemple, au début de la pandémie, le ministre de la Santé du Royaume-Uni et NHS England ont donné une orientation pour permettre que la collecte des données permette de déterminer quelles sont les personnes à risque.
We're being pushed toward a digital and AI-enabled healthcare future. But at the same time, I would say that the pandemic is making it impossible for us to ignore persistent and critical weaknesses across our health data ecosystem. One is the imperative to have connected data and information technology systems. And Alyssa made this point in her opening remarks that systemic issues with how our public health data in this country are siloed. They're inconsistently and frankly inequitably collected. They're reluctantly shared. It's really impacted our understanding of what's happening in different regions and in different vulnerable populations and our ability to lead a coherent strategy. We also need to be clear and consistent about our approaches to ethical and secure data sharing. For example, with a view to making a wider range of digital communication tools such as Slack and WhatsApp accessible to doctors and patients and teachers and students, British Columbia temporarily modified its Access to Information and Privacy Act, lifting a requirement that personal data must be stored in Canada, and that reminding us that the purpose of privacy law is not to make data inaccessible, but rather to provide clarity and certainty so that data can be accessed ethically, safely, and compliantly. So where do we go from here? I would say, COVID-19 has certainly created urgency, but the promise of AI-enabled personalized healthcare will remain unfulfilled unless the public demands it. Because only through public engagement can we ensure that the right problems are being solved, that the solutions being put forward are practical and impactful, and that the risks are understood, identified, and mitigated. And we are seeing public appetite to engage through COVID-19. The public is increasingly aware of the power of personal health data and is seeking ways to contribute and benefit from these data. For example, over 1 million people in Canada have self-reported their health status to covidnearyou.org, 3 times the rate that we see in the United States, helping local and national authorities to make better decisions in real time. But at the same time, I would say that full engagement is predicated on empowerment of the public. And this requires widespread digital knowledge and literacy so that individuals can appraise the risks and benefits of data sharing. They can exercise appropriate control over how their data are used, and so that they can realize the benefits of personalized healthcare. I would point to Finland, which in many ways is leading the way. The University of Helsinki, many of you will know, has created a series of free online AI courses aimed at the public, elements of AI, motivated by a belief that, to quote the founders of this, AI should not be left in the hands of a few elite coders. The goal is to encourage the broader public to learn what AI is and what it can and can't do. And to date, about well over 500,000 learners from 170 countries have signed up, 40% of whom are women, which is disproportionately low, but vastly higher than you would see a typical enrollment in, for example, computer science. So in closing, I would say that the future of personalized healthcare and the promise of data, of AI, of digital tools really hinge on an engaged public and an empowered public, because it's only with, for, and through an engaged and empowered public that we're going to be able to build a healthcare system that people trust and that reflects diverse public expectations.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Ryan, for those insightful comments. Now we're going to go on to some questions. So we have a number of questions that we have received. The first one I want to pose to you, and again, of course, you're all experts about AI and health, but when I go to the doctor's office here, I see a bunch of files, paper files, and the last thing I think about is AI when I go to the doctor's office. So, my question here, just to set the baseline, is AI already being used within our health systems, and in what ways? Maybe Elisa can contribute to that. Start.
Sure. Glad to jump in. There are examples in Canada of where AI is being used in our health systems in a variety of different ways. Less often in a primary care setting, less often in your doctor's office, I think, than anywhere else. Unfortunately, that's maybe the last frontier. It's being used very actively in research and innovation. I would say that we have a really healthy and robust AI for health research and innovation ecosystem in Canada at our 3 national AI institutes at AME, Mila, and Vector. 30% of the Canada CFAR AI chairs that have been named through the Pan-Canadian AI strategy have an interest in AI for health. Hundreds of graduate students are working on this in collaboration with health researchers. So on research and innovations, it's very, very active. Now, implementation within our health system, there are a few examples. And again, sort of echoing what Ryan is saying, COVID has accelerated the implementation of some AI applications within our health system. So one example is called XR AI. It is a computer vision software that basically uses AI to detect COVID and diagnose COVID from chest x-rays. So this was an AI tool that was developed by a company called 1Qubit. It was shown to be 100% accurate in identifying COVID-19 infections and distinguishing them from other kinds of chest infections like other kinds of pneumonia. And it was actually implemented during the pandemic by the Saskatchewan Health Authority as another tool that clinicians could use in hospitals to help them to diagnose and confirm a case of COVID. So there's one example. Another example is a team at St. Michael's Hospital in Toronto has been very, very active in working directly with clinicians. The data scientists work with the clinicians to understand where their pain points are and where their challenges are. And the team has developed an early warning tool to be able to detect and predict when a patient may need to be transferred to the ICU. So if you think of a patient that's in another critical care unit or in a long-term care unit, and they're starting to go downhill, they now have a system to be able to predict when a patient needs to go into the ICU, and therefore, make sure that there's beds and staff available to manage that patient. St. Mike's has many different examples, and if people are interested, they should check out the website, because this is one of the active labs that's working to implement AI solutions directly. And then Blue Dot was the other example that I was going to give, actually, and Ryan already gave it, so I'll let others jump in with their favorite AI examples.
Great. Anyone else want to talk about this topic?
I mean, Anna is probably in a better position, but I'll mention one example that I've been close to recently, and has to do with the logistics inside the healthcare system. So in Quebec, we worked with Mila. We worked with a company that has deployed in clinics an AI system that predicts offer and demand of the resources, like doctors for appointments and nurses for appointments, so as to reduce the waiting time when you go to a clinic using web interface to reserve and so on. And they were able to have the waiting time using these kinds of techniques. So it's a very, very simple tool from a machine learning perspective, but it can make a huge difference for patients. Right?
Well, we know airlines use that all the time, although maybe not so successfully. Other comments on this?
There is one tool that is used in our ICU at CKids, where they're monitoring this oxygen situation in the patient, and it's an indicator. Is a patient model that's been a while ago, and it's actually been monitored for a while by the clinicians to assist them in making decisions for the right procedures to perform on the patient to assess deterioration. We have about 4 projects now that are sort of in the stages of silent trial, and they range from as Yoshua pointed out, the scheduling. Everybody needs scheduling, especially in the area of sort of the surplus of the procedures that weren't performed during the lockdown of the first stage, and that we now need to urgently schedule and catch up. And so it's related to COVID, but it is scheduling in a sort of the operative services, all the way to cutting down the wait in the emergency department by predicting what diagnosis they are likely to have, to know what tests they need to do before they see the doctor, because now they have to see the doctor to get the test. And this project is led by a clinician who did a master's in computer science because of the recognition of the importance of these tools, and Devin Singh and Mike Brudno. It's and these tools are very close to being implemented. So if this talk was, early in the year, I think we would have a lot more example, even locally.
Okay. And I want to add, go ahead, Ryan.
Ryan, please.
I was just going to build on what Anna said. So I don't have an example of an AI deployment, but rather a consideration. I made the point that digital literacy and engagement by the public is key, but I think as well that applies to our healthcare professionals and our healthcare leaders, that there's a need for digital literacy and comfort in order to really scale these solutions, and for healthcare leaders and healthcare professionals to see the benefit of those in their day-to-day practice. So I think that's a key priority as we move toward digitally enabled personalized healthcare.
Yeah, I wanted just to reinforce a thing that Alyssa mentioned, which is the use of AI to process medical images. This is probably one of the areas where the deployment is, the earliest. So again, we work with another company in Quebec, Imagia, that is deploying these medical imaging tools for cancer in particular. And these tools have been taken over, sold by Olympus, which is one of the dominant market players in the area of medical imaging devices. So there are really places where you might not know, but the clinicians now have access to tools like this.
Okay, thank you. One of the things one is struck with when you watch American TV is all the ads for drugs and medicines, and a long list of counterindications, of course. So next question is related to what Ryan was saying. Maybe we can drill down on that. What is the public's role in driving health digitalization and realizing the promise of personalized healthcare? Just as we see that drug therapies, many times it is the public that is pushing to want the newest and best medicine. Yeah. Maybe Ryan wants to start.
Sure, I'm happy to, and I would just say that the kind of transformations that we're talking about within the healthcare system, which will take time, but will also take enormous political will and political risk to implement, and that doesn't happen unless the public is pushing, unless the public is saying, I demand that my healthcare system change. I demand that my data are used in better, more effective ways, and that I'm getting better. Getting better results. So there has to be that sense of public urgency. And I think by and large, within, and I'll generalize here and I'll be criticized for it, but I think the Canadian sort of ethos is a bit of complacence about our healthcare system. There's a sense that it's pretty good. We have this mythology that we're the best healthcare system in the world, or among the best healthcare systems in the world. I think it's because we're constantly comparing ourselves to the United States, not to the rest of the world. So I think that we need to shake up that complacency, and people need to demand better and more because we are spending. Certainly where we are leading is in terms of how much we're spending per capita and not getting the results that we want. I would also say that COVID-19 has created, I think, an interesting moment for this level of public engagement, because we have seen a public engaged not simply in data and AI, but generally in science and innovation in ways that we've never seen before. And that's had both positive and negative ramifications. But I think it has resulted in an unprecedented degree of interest and awareness, but also from the perspective of scientists and the research community, a need for greater transparency, a need for greater accountability, a need for greater engagement, better communication. So I think this is an interesting moment. The other thing I would say is that the public needs to stand up for digital and data equity and justice, because we've really seen especially in COVID-19, but it's just exposed what we've always known, that the data, that access to healthcare is inequitable across this country. It's racist, it's prejudicial. That means that the data we're collecting are also inequitable, which means that the data we're using to develop our AI algorithms and solutions are informed by an incomplete picture of our country. So there's a risk there, and I think that's something that the public needs to become agitated about. I guess the final thing I will say on this is that at the end of the day, the public is in the position of power here, because it's ultimately their data that we're talking about. And I think if people understand that that data doesn't have a lot of value unless it is actually connected, shared, analyzed, interpreted, and used, that they'll realize, well, I guess the risk of not sharing my data is greater than the risk of sharing it at the end of the day. And that's ultimately what's going to push our healthcare system into really new ways of doing things and engaging with patients and the public. So I'll stop there. I'll get off my soapbox and let others talk.
Thank you. Anyone else want to comment on this?
Well, I share that soapbox, Ryan. I also really strongly believe that, the only way that we're going to make progress on this space is by deeply engaging with the public and patient groups and going beyond, sort of engage, what we used to call engagement, or the kinds of engagement that we've done in the past, which is, is outreach and education and, advertising campaigns. We actually need to include the public and patient groups in our decisions, in our initiatives that are developing these applications, at the table when we are thinking about building new health data platforms, in the hospital, as we are thinking about solving problems within the health system, actually think of them as real stakeholders. Not only is it their health data that we're asking for use, but it's also their tax dollars that are used within our health systems in Canada. And I think that including them in the process is the way to build trust, but also to get better solutions at the end of the day, because they're the people who are going to be deeply and personally affected by this work.
I'd like to add a little sort of game theoretical aspect to what Ryan talked about and Elisa reinforced. If you think about the privacy versus availability of data for new treatments dilemma, there's an aspect to this which is a tragedy of the commons, right? So for me as an individual, and not knowing too much about how AI works and how data would be managed and so on, the safe thing to do is to say no, I want to keep my data not shared, right? And at the same time, if everybody does that, then we all lose, because we lose the potential of better treatments for everyone. So it's exactly a tragedy of the commons thing. Like if I don't share and I hope that the others are sharing, then I'll be a beneficiary, and so I'm kind of a free rider. So how do we break free rider problems? We can't leave it in the hands of individuals. Individuals have to understand the situation, like the game, like in the tragedy of the commons and the Boston Commons, and see that the collective solution to this is to change the rules so that, okay, so we all agree that there's a, some mechanism for sharing that's eventually going to be beneficial. It's like paying taxes. If taxes are optional, then the whole taxation system is not going to work very much. Some people will do it, but maybe we'll get 10% that we would get otherwise. So we have to think about this as a collective solution that we all, enough people agree on for the whole thing to work and not crumble.
I want to also comment. I completely agree with my colleagues. It is an incredibly important problem, and I think that we have to sort of modify our cultural accepted roles. Right now at multiple levels, there are people who want to share the data, but then the privacy laws protect them from getting better care. There are people who potentially don't want and want to keep it to themselves, hoping to benefit from others. But as Joshua said, but as Ryan said, all the people are different. If they want personalized care and their data is not similar to anybody else in the system, there's no way to really know exactly what they are and for them to benefit from it. So who they are, rather. So I think this has been advocated already by everybody, and Joshua and Ryan more so. This has to be modified at the privacy level and the benefits and the risks have to be weighed. And I really liked what Ryan actually said, that privacy doesn't exist to protect the data from access. Privacy exists to enable access in an efficient and ethical manner. And I think that's what we have to focus on right now. And I hope that with that focus, we will enable the public to be more comforted in that the rules are such that their data is being used to help them, and also that it is being done in a safe manner. Protecting data from research is not an option in this day and age. We cannot do this anymore, and it's still happening.
Well, let me move on to the next question, because I don't think I've heard the word province mentioned here. Healthcare is a provincial responsibility. So the question would be, what do governments need to do in order to enable the potential of AI-driven innovation in healthcare? We'll pick that one up. Joshua?
Provinces. I think there's another game theoretical issue here that there's not enough incentives on the provinces to do what needs to be done so that collectively at the level of the country, we end up better off. If each province does their own ways of handling privacy, their own ways of storing and managing data, we'll lose, because again, the maximum benefit is if we can share data across as many people as possible. And by the way, that goes beyond provinces. There's similar issues across countries. So the more we can make international alliances and maybe work with international organizations, there are many of them that are thinking about these. I'm involved in the Global Partnership on AI that has a working group specialized on the data question. There's another working group working on the pandemic. And in both cases, these questions of it's important for the different countries to agree with each other on those on the value system about privacy, data, innovation, so that we can maximize the benefit of AI. So the situation exists between provinces. The situation exists, in the world, and the way that we get around again these issues of tragedy to commons, for example, I'm going to wait for the others to innovate and take risks and then reap the benefits later. That's not going to work. We need, in the case of Canada, we need the federal government to create incentives for provinces to agree on how to deal with these questions. At the level, at the international level, we also need international organizations to create treaties and other kinds of agreements where now the incentive will be to be part of the game, to agree to some standards and things like that.
Yes, a very complicated issue. Anyone else care to comment on this?
I can jump in. I mean, this is something that we focused on a lot with the AI for Health Task Force, because our recommendations were directed to governments, plural, so federal, provincial, territorial governments. And one of the places where that hasn't really been talked about a lot yet in this discussion is in the startup community and thinking about innovation and commercialization. We have like a huge startup community in Canada of young entrepreneurs, really vibrant. They have great ideas for how to develop and deploy AI solutions within our health systems, but they face so many barriers, right? So, of course, there's the data barrier, first and foremost, and we've talked a lot about that. But there's also a talent barrier, finding expertise. We have lots of AI expertise in Canada, but finding specialized expertise of commercialization within the health system and matching that with some of these AI companies is a real gap. But also just giving them access to the types of challenges that face our health system. Often our entrepreneurs are working in a bubble. They don't have access to clinicians. They don't have access to health system administrators. They don't have resources, and they're not really on the ground within the health system. And so if we can sort of harness some of that talent and energy and passion and enthusiasm and bring it into the health system, there's a huge opportunity there, I think, to really develop some great innovation. And so we need policies in order to enable that. And we need supports and investments and resources by governments to enable innovation directly within our health system.
Yeah, and of course, those startups will be more profitable if they don't have to reinvent the wheel for each province in which they're going to deploy their products, right? It's a no-brainer that the costs go up with the customization that is needed. And so we're just going to help our industry. And if they have to, if the cost of developing is multiplied by 10 because it's a different system in each province, how are they going to compete against companies, say, in the US that have a market of, 300 million? So we need to be looking at that angle as well.
So establishing critical mass in the market is very important. Now, we do have a question about the drug development, and this probably comes from an economist in the audience. It's if we change the rules in Canada so that the data and findings concerning drug development had to be made available to facilitate faster advancement of science, would that drive that industry out of Canada so corporations protect profits?
Well, not necessarily. It depends how it's done, right? So you can imagine that you have positive incentives. The easy thing in the first place is that when governments put in money in innovation, and they do put a lot of money, they could, not just act as any other investors or grant giving organization, but also put in, constraints in terms of governance of the data and things like that, and sharing of information, so that, okay, we're going to help you develop something in some direction that you might have not done otherwise. And that's something we care about. But also, we're going to ask you to follow some rules so that it's going to be easier for other actors in the ecosystem to take advantage of what you're doing, so that overall we all win. It's it's another tragedy of the commons, and the only way out is with these incentives. But again, it doesn't have to be only negative constraints. A lot of companies would like to share data. In fact, and individuals in those companies would love to share their work. But it's just that the current rules of the game in that ecosystem are such that it would be a losing proposition. Well, so how do we deal with the international competition here? Well, it's a very good question. So as I said, one way is with positive incentives, and then the other way that I think we should also be working on is international agreements. So again, as part of my work in the Global Partnership by we're thinking about how could OECD countries work together on coordinating their efforts to drug development towards public good that would satisfy these kinds of transparency and data sharing constraints that, and then of course it would be the interest of companies to go after those prizes or those rewards, would become the motivation for them. But if we can pool our efforts across many countries, I think then that kind of addresses a bit of that question.
Yeah, go ahead, Ryan.
Yeah, and I just want to build on that because I completely agree with Joshua. I think it requires a bit of a philosophical shift in how we understand the role of our healthcare system and our health data. It's both about delivering healthcare and ensuring that our population health security is protected, and our healthcare system is there to drive innovation. And if we understand that the healthcare system is there for innovation and to provide healthcare, then we can recognize that the healthcare system has a role to play in partnering with the private sector in terms of supporting that drive for innovation. And I agree with Joshua, companies are willing to share data. They're actually eager to share data, but they need something in return. They need access to de-identified, secure health data that will allow them to further accelerate innovation. So I don't think it's an either or; it's a both and. But I don't think our policymakers in particular generally think about our healthcare system as a driver of innovation, and it fundamentally is and must be recognized as such.
Well, definitely a driver of data, and data must lead to innovation. Who do you see as a neutral arbiter that could put together such a cooperative game? Is there any ideas on that?
Well, I think it has to come from governments in some form or other. And it could be international, as I said earlier. That's even better. It could be there are pharmaceutical companies that are trying to form coalitions to have some form of data sharing, with partial, hiding of information and so on. There are some technical aspects to try to facilitate these kinds of things. But I think if governments came in and said, oh, we're going to encourage that kind of thing, keep in mind that a huge chunk of the money we spend in our societies is for healthcare, and mostly it goes through governments, and so governments have a huge lever in orienting how we're going to do this in the future. They're just not using it right now. Innovation in healthcare can save a lot of money in addition to lives. We're thinking about better treatments, but you also have to think about how inefficient the whole system is compared to what it could be with those tools. And so I don't think governments realize how much they could save in addition to providing better services by being more proactive about innovation in healthcare.
Great comments. Lisa, did you want to jump in on this one?
Well, just to address your question directly, Alejandro, so the idea coming out of the AI for Health Task Force is that, this is why we need a national strategy on AI for health, right? So that we can provide the mechanisms, the place, the structure, the governance for, how this activity is coordinated across the country. How do we, bring leaders together? How do we bring researchers together with clinicians, like really laying out a roadmap, for how this can be done across the country. And, I think that's where that's sort of like the first step that has to be taken, is this sort of deciding that we're going to develop a national AI for health strategy, and then build the structures and mechanisms to do that. And I think we can do it very quickly because there's a huge amount of goodwill across the country. Lots of provinces, as I mentioned earlier, are already actively working in the space. I've been convening an informal working group of provincial health data leaders through the course of the pandemic as they learn from each other about what's happening in each of their jurisdictions around health data. And I think there's a lot of interest, activity, goodwill, and what we just need is signals from those governments, federal and provincial and territorial governments, that they want to do something collectively, and we could get on with it very quickly.
Thank you.
I just want to to support sort of, if there is already a coalition of experts that are able to provide this expertise to the government, I think they should be supported in any way is possible, because I feel that when the government regulates these things and is completely hands-on, it just takes a long time, and I'm not sure we can afford that anymore, especially you know, as is highlighted by this pandemic.
Thank you, Anna. I want to switch gears a little bit. So we heard about the black box models. You know, I'm a mathematician, so I have an innate distrust for black boxes. So the question we have here is, why should clinicians trust black box models? And I think that's Anna, as you brought up the topic.
I think it's a very much discussed topic, and I'm very happy for the recent research that I had mentioned in my opening remarks that shows that if the model is very simple, it has many repercussions. Not only a simple model is often unable to capture the complexity of the data and provide the best accuracy and performance that would be ideal for the medical care and healthcare settings where it's deployed, but also that humans who are interacting with them are lulled into sort of security, that they understand the model, and that because they understand the model, they know how it works and when it will make a mistake, and they don't. AI models make mistakes that are very different from humans, that humans would not make, the same way as it would never make a mistake, some mistakes that a human would make. And so together, there are several works that were showcased in high impact journals that show that when clinicians deploy these models now, it is when they work jointly with this model, not just the model, not just the clinician, is when the performance was the best. And I think this, there is the argument in our field, in the field of explainability in AI, is sort of shifting to what do people actually need to understand to use a model, right? That is very important. It is not a black box that we provide, and out of that box, a number will fall out, and the clinician has to blindly trust it. I think we do not want that either. What we want is we want to provide them information that they can use to be able to reason about the decision that the model is making. We are building, and there are many colleagues of ours that are building sort of explainability tools around decision-making of these very complex deep learning models. And these tools are able to go back to the original data and say, this may be the reasons for why we raise the risk right now for this specific patient for a critical event occurring in the near future. These types of tools that the clinicians, that we are trying to provide to the clinicians are becoming much more comfortable with.
Great. Very encouraging. So typically the machine would provide a ranking of options, or just say this is what?
It is very different depending on the tool and on the question. I'm not even going to, I can give a specific example. In our case, in the predicting critical event in ICU, we are going back to the original physiological signals, in addition to displaying risk, to say here at this point, there was a jump in heart rate, a drop in blood pressure, and that is the reason why. It is a reason that led to the decision making. It is not the reason. If it was that simple, we wouldn't have needed this complex model. But it is the reason that feeds into the reasoning, and then it's possible to interact with a decision tool that we are building. I think Joshua had a.
Joshua wants to jump in. Yes, Joshua, please.
Yes. I want to step back a little bit about the black box notion. So first of all, it is not a black box. It's very easy to measure anything you want in those boxes, much more so than in your brain. And we even understand pretty well what are the fundamental principles behind this. For example, you said we don't know what the equations are, but we do actually. And we understand, what is it, the equations of learning, which is what is it that this thing is trying to achieve, we understand very well. So it's not black at all. Now, what is true is that after those systems have learned, they've learned very complex functions that often cannot be reduced to a few sentences. And now I want to bring in a sort of cognitive neuroscience perspective. As Anna was saying earlier, humans as well have a lot of the computations that are going on in our brains that are not accessible to consciousness. In fact, the part that is accessible to consciousness, meaning that we can report verbally, that we can explain, is like the tip of the iceberg. Most of what is going on in our head, we don't have access to, and it seems easy, it seems simple, but it's not. And in fact, in my AI research, I have a theory that says, well, there's a good reason why there's only a part of our knowledge that we are able to communicate, because this is the part that can be communicated, and the rest is just behind the radar screen because there's no other way. If it was simple enough that we can express it with rules and in linguistic terms, then it would be part of the communicable language. And the fact that it's not is because it just doesn't fit that constraint.
That's fascinating, really fascinating. Anyone else wants to jump in on this one? Okay. Maybe I want to switch now to a topic we haven't talked much about, which is about the ethics. Obviously, there's a lot of unease in the general population just talking about data, but then you talk about AI, you go and look up your favorite movie on AI, right? And there's one that comes up. And, so there's a big question, where is the ethics in all this AI development? So I think this is a very important question. I want to allow each of you to maybe address that.
So I can start. I had a wonderful experience supervising a fellow in ethics and AI. Might have been the first, it has been a fascinating learning experience for me and for the ethicist that was co-supervising, the bioethicist that was co-supervising her, because there are many notions that are believed to be new, that are not new as soon as they are understood by the ethicist about what we are talking about. The dilemmas that are brought up in self-driving, that what will machine choose? Will it kill the 3 people or go over this or one person? This is not a new dilemma. This has been debated for years. And guess what? It's humans that are programming these machines. It is what will say that they should be. And it turns out that the humans ethically are not, always the best. It turns out that in these studies, humans always choose what's best for them personally, as opposed to what's best for humanity. So it's the general laws that were put forth, by Isaac Asimov and way back when. They're not very different to what has already been discussed. So I think what needs to be happening now, and what is happening now, is the discussion between the AI and ethics communities in sort of trying to communicate what is what AI is, because it's referred to AI as a hammer, and this hammer is going to fall on my foot and hurt, and this is we have to prevent. So this dialogue that has been happening in the past, I think, is shifting, which is very comforting. There are a lot of ethicists that are understanding the complexity a bit more, recognizing that some of these issues have been addressed in the past, which is very nice. And I think this is being reflected in some ways in, for example, the review board. So I worked closely with the head of the ethics review board at SickKids to sort of design a somewhat different process for AI projects that allows for data exploration and to perform AI in a way that's most useful for the medical data. So I wanted to start with that because I think that the dialogue is shifting from these two communities speaking in parallel and not being helpful to each other necessarily to a more joint and cohesive narrative. And yeah.
Lisa.
Yeah, I just wanted to, build on what Anna is saying. I think we have the ethical frameworks, right? We've been doing research and innovation in the health system for a long time. So we've considered so many of the ethical questions. We have the frameworks, we have the guidelines. What we're missing is, as Anna described it, is capacity. We need to advance people's understanding of the ethical questions in AI and how they're similar to ethical questions that we have already encountered in thinking about health and research, and sort of building up knowledge and capacity within clinicians, within research ethics boards, and again, in the general public as well. I think one of the biggest ethical questions that we have in this space is something that Ryan alluded to, is really around health equity, right? So one of the biggest questions, ethical questions, is ensuring that these systems are deployed in a way that is fair and equitable and inclusive across populations. I think that is a question that we have to really bring to the forefront and invest a lot of time and effort in understanding and solving.
Joshua, jump in.
Yeah, I think this was mentioned, but I want to insist on one element, which is the education of the public. I think a lot of people don't necessarily understand that what is going on with ethics is really the challenge is we have these conflicting values. There are different things that we want, and they come in conflict. And how do we resolve those conflicts? So one aspect of this is sort of rational thinking. In other words, what are going to be the consequences of each of the potential actions that we're considering? This is essentially using the best science. Potentially even AI can help us to make predictions about the future consequences of some actions. And then there is something that is really outside of reason, that it has to do with more, you can think of politics and moral values. At the end of the day, if we have conflicting values and we consider the long-term consequences, we may have to consider choices that involve more of privacy versus saving lives, is the example I gave earlier. But there are many such conflicts, and sometimes the trade-offs could be much more advantageous than the ones we're currently considering because we're just stuck in the status quo. But the point I wanted to make is many people don't understand that. They just think that we have these absolutes, like, oh, data cannot be shared, right? Because this is an ethical thing. No, ethics is about how we find the right compromises in ways that are both rational and take into account a sort of collective consensus regarding what is it that we value more, and these are political choices.
Absolutely. I think Ryan, want to take a crack at this?
Yeah, I will just reiterate a couple of points that were made, and to Alyssa's point, I think that an inclusive and just AI is perhaps one of the most important ethical questions that we face as we advance AI in healthcare. And the other is what Joshua just mentioned, that is, our ethical approach to data. The questions around data, the ethics around data sharing, use, and application, in most cases have been answered. We have those ethical frameworks in place. It's how we apply those in, for example, privacy law or interpretation of privacy law, where it becomes a bit more problematic. There's a more, the idea that privacy is absolutely sacrosanct does not really respect the ethical question around risk and benefit and the trade-offs that we have to make in any ethical decision with respect to sharing data and benefiting from data. So I think it's, again, sort of echoing what Anna said, it's not that we haven't confronted or dealt with these ethical questions in the past, it's that we need to understand how to apply them in a new or perhaps scaled setting.
I actually want to just a quick comment on Ryan's comment and about the potential of equitability. Of course, we want it to be equitable, but until very recently, Canada has not been collecting, for example, the information on ethnicity or race. We can't even test how inequitable the data is right now. They're using proxies. They're inferring it from last names. Is this better? Is this at all appropriate? No, I'm not talking about the AI. I'm talking about the data that has been collected from the individuals to help protect privacy. I think there is a really important issue in what Ryan just mentioned, and the necessity of of recognizing the trade-offs that we are making. The equitability is only possible when the data for equitable solutions is available. In other cases, when we work with a lot of, for example, genetic and genomic data, we have 3,000 Caucasian individuals and 20 African Americans. And there's not very much we can do to ensure equitable algorithms that will work equally well for these two populations. I think there's a whole relatively new area of AI, which is the fairness, and which is looking very closely at what methods can be created and how to ensure that the methods that we are creating in AI are fair to the underlying populations. If we have zero information on the populations, if some of the populations are excluded from the analysis for privacy by the policymakers, there is nothing we can do. I think it's a very, very important issue to bring up. And I want to go back to Ryan to say, this is where the engagement of the public is critical, because if the public wants to reap the benefits of this amazing technology, they have to stand up and say, here's our data, we want it to be used. Do not let the old policies stop the governments from us benefiting from this technology.
Thank you very much. I think we have 3 minutes left. I think the ethical questions are indeed central, and I think they definitely have to be sorted out. And what I think we have is that the current state of affairs is not fair, it's not equitable. And if we can move to that, and of course AI is a technology that would allow us to really reap the benefits of that more equitable system. So I think that is really a fantastic observation. So I think we've talked about many things, about science, about research, about ethics, about implementing, about governments, and about the pan-Canadian policy and project for health and AI. So there are a lot of different strands here that the public can pick up on. I want to thank the panelists for their passionate and engaged interventions here. I really learned a lot myself. It's just fantastic to hear what you have to say. And I'm sure we'll be hearing a lot more from each and every one of you and the rest of your colleagues. So now on behalf of the Royal Society of Canada and University of Toronto, I want to thank the G7 sponsors. And I want to thank the public for participating and also providing some very interesting questions. And maybe we'll wrap things up here. Thank you all very much.
Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.